Mato Anomalies. The latest RPG from ArrowWiz is Mato Anomalies, and it'll have you going through this little world of Mato, this neo-futuristic Asia, and it has you getting to the bottom of some really dark and seedy underworld activities. The best way I could describe this is a typical RPG. Your character is immersed in this really awful looking future. Crime is rampant, drugs are on the street, and you're there to just try and get through your day. There's a lot of people that really backstab each other. You're led into this situation, nearly trapped, and that's kind of what kicks off this whole story. You're getting through this syndicate, trying to find out different members, different groups, what's going on here. This alternative future, it seems to be quite a dystopia. We are in a new Shanghai. The city has grown very upward, very vertical because everything's so packed, and well, that kind of brings me to a point I wanted to make about the look of this game. It does look really nice, in my opinion. It has that anime manga style, but it's done with cutscenes as well. So it is really interesting, and that's what caught my attention at first. You get in just past the visuals, and some of those battle themes are not so bad. I actually appreciate the music in this one, and it didn't really get boring. The visual style certainly reminds me of Persona, and that's kind of a negative comparison in this case, because I think Persona kind of has a corner on the amazing graphics, a style, and a banging soundtrack, but this game is not to be ignored either. There is plenty in the terms of soundtrack, and visually that art style brings this to a pretty good level, although the environments aren't very, well, varied. There is an alternative kind of digital world, very similar to how Mega Man works, where you're inside of this other reality, whether you're in somebody's head doing a mini game or if you're doing kind of the normal RPG thing. It brings you to a place that looks pretty fantastical. It's kind of a single road, it's not very open, but that's not the point. It really gives the opportunity for some just a little flare of imagination. You're facing somebody, the glutton, and there's money everywhere. There's certain themes that go along with it well. It looks pretty nice. The minigame I mentioned, it's a bit of a card game. So you're an investigator, you're trying to get answers out of people. Sometimes they're resistant, and what happens is it breaks into a minigame where you get a card, several cards. You have the option of many decks as the game goes on, but you use these cards to best your opponent in a very similar fashion to just about any card game we've ever played. But there's a lot of mechanics at work in this. There's a lot of different demons that accompany some of the targets, some of the enemies that you're facing off with, and those demons cause a lot of chaos and a lot of different effects along the way. You have to learn how to combat specific effects and get better at the game that way, and that also applies to the main kind of combat, the not mini game. When you're exploring this world, you're coming across these different enemies in these very linear point A to B kind of challenge areas, these lairs, and although it's not incredibly imaginative, it's interestingly enough, I can explore, I can get these chests, I can go up some routes and not others. There's a little bit there, but the meat of that gameplay is the combat. And the combat is with your party versus an enemy party, of course, and you take turns. This is a traditional RPG, but you get the kind of specialties out of your characters. One is a healer, for example. One may hit a little harder than the other. You might have some that are very dodgy. They're not going to get hit by anything, and these are all aspects that you can tweak as the game goes on. You do get a kind of traditional equipment screen. You have equipment, weapons, items that you can put on top of your character to spec some of your abilities and the abilities themselves. So as the game goes on, you do level up, you have quite a lot to work towards, and it does feel pretty rewarding to get that going. When your team comes together just right, sometimes it works perfectly. If I may summarize my opinion, I find the combat in this to be really typical, kind of what you come to expect from any turn-based RPG, and although the minigame is in there, just sweetens it a little bit, I found myself kind of trailing off as the game went on, and some of that combat wasn't enough to pull me in. But the story is here for that specific reason. The story is going to pull you in if you can give it the attention it deserves, because it does take a little while to pick up, but it does start moving very well after that. So looks-wise, this game is very nice to me, very visually pleasing, and to the ear, not so terrible. It's combat is kind of the weak point, but the story here is what's going to draw you through RPGs. That's very typical of an RPG. I'm there with a 7 out of 10. I think this game has a lot of interesting things going for it. I like everything that I've seen. In fact, I don't think I've disliked anything that I've seen. I'm just not so sure if I'll remember this one several years from now.